Hi everybody, thank you for joining. My name's Helen and I'm responsible for our relationships with not-for-profit customers at Kadence, and I'm very pleased to say that we have quite a few. So yeah, culturally that's really important to us, and it's brilliant that we've got lots of people dialing in. Thank you for joining. We're also recording this session, so we'll be sending the recording out to everybody after the call, after the session. So this is our how to enable hybrid working in not-for-profit organisations discussion. We want to jump right in and get the experiences of a couple of our guests that are here with us. So we have Daniela and we have Gordon with us. So why don't you guys go ahead and introduce yourself? Daniela, do you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Daniela, as Helen said. I'm the head of operations for Reprieve. Reprieve is a medium-sized international human rights NGO. And I joined Reprieve during the lockdown in January 2021. And before that, I worked for Lumos Foundation, which is a children's NGO.
Awesome, thank you. Gordon?
Awesome, and yeah, so it's great to be here. I'm Gordon. I'm the head of digital and IT at Scottish Canals, and we are a government body. We're a non-departmental government body operating the canal network across Scotland, and we also operate a number of different visitor attractions across the country. So places like the Falkirk Wheel, a good chance you've probably been somewhere around those areas. Have you visited Scotland? So we are about 350 strong organisation. We operate offices and sites across the country, which adds its own different challenges, but it's a great role, great people, and a brilliant place to be doing this work.
Fab, thank you. So just a couple of bits before we jump straight into the discussion. We're going to, as I said, record the session so people can play it back, or obviously those that wanted to listen to it at another time can do, so colleagues or whatever that you want to share it with. The discussion is going to run for about 30 minutes and then we will do 10 minutes-ish of questions. So please feel free to add your questions to the chat function within Zoom. We're not going to be taking live questions, but we'll be recording the questions and then taking them at the end. And yeah, just really hope everybody enjoys the discussion. So I'm going to stop screen share so that we can see each other's faces more easily. And I just wanted to kick things off. Maybe I'll start with you, Daniela, to ask you really what hybrid means for you in your organisation, because it can mean different things to different people.
So Reprieve started hybrid working, like proper hybrid working, very formalized in June this year, and it means 40% of the time staff have to be in the office and the rest of the time they work from home. We have got a full office setup, and then we've got laptops for everyone who works from home, and it's really aimed to still give staff the opportunity to meet and have meetings in person as well, but equally it allowed us to downsize our office space, which has significantly reduced our overheads, and it's also really, that was the key thing why we started this process. It's what staff wanted. Staff asked for working from home, and so hybrid working has become practice at Reprieve, and there's no plans to change that in the future.
Great, thank you. Gordon?
Yeah, that's a similar story, but I mean, I think what hybrid really comes to fruition for us is about creating better spaces for people. You know, we have like many organisations had to adopt a hybrid approach, you know, due to the pandemic, and suddenly having to work out what does an infrastructure and what does a setup for staff look like when we can't physically be around each other. That kind of very quickly merged into, well, we now have an opportunity to rethink how we do things. So how do we create the physical spaces that people want at the times that they want, and how do we get creative about how we use the infrastructure that we own? And that's led to some really interesting and honest conversations in the business. And actually what it now means is our workspaces are becoming more flexible. They're becoming smaller, similar to what Daniela was saying, but we're using them in a different way. You know, how do we now offer kind of co-working space to organisations that are similar in our sectors, or using that space to benefit social enterprises and other charities in the areas, and actually making this a community rather than turning it into just an office for our employees. So that's actually been a really exciting journey for us, and for our partners that we work with, and for our staff. We've had, overwhelmingly have came back positive in the sense of how hybrid provides for them the better family mix in life, the better work balance, but also we get a much more productive output from colleagues, because we are reducing our requirement for people to commute, carbon footprints, all those other things that come along with it, and are really, really important to be part of the hybrid journey.
Yeah, we touched on this a bit, didn't we, in our discussion, the three of us, earlier in the week, that the not-for-profit sector has really got behind hybrid, and for many of the reasons you just described, it makes sense culturally. It fits. So taking a step back, and I'd love to get as practical as we can for people on this call, because I understand that people are quite keen to figure out how they might implement a policy, perhaps, or there are a lot of people at the start of this journey. So Daniela, I know that you did come up with a policy. Is that right? That you have actually got something in place?
Yeah, I don't think we would have been able to implement it that successful without a policy and literally giving people guidelines. And when we call it a policy, it really is more like guidelines, and it was very natural. So we moved office, so I started in January. We moved office in March 2021 from a larger office to a smaller office, so people never came back into the original office. They straight away came into the new office, and I have to say that really helped us as well with the hybrid working, because we introduced them back to the office with an office guide, with the hybrid working policy. So people knew straight away what to expect. Everything was new. All the paper has disappeared. I work with a lot of lawyers. Lawyers love their paper. We're now almost completely paperless, which is a 90-degree change for brief. And I think with the hybrid working policy, we literally sat down and said, okay, what do we need to cover in it? Like we included things like how to conduct meetings in a hybrid way. And I think we discussed earlier in the week, we're still not quite there to manage that properly. But also, how much time do we expect staff to be in the office? And that was a lot based on what staff were asking for, but also how much desk space we had left. And then calculating in, we have a lot of volunteers, or not volunteers, we've got summer fellows and fellows from our in-country offices who come to visit, so we also have to have space for them. We've got a lot of meetings, so the meeting space was a big thing. So we really started off with doing a questionnaire with staff before we even moved the office. What do you want from the new office? And then we incorporated that, and a lot of it was about casual working spaces, like Gordon said. We've got a lot more breakout areas now. We've got telephone booths where people can take their calls, and we really only have got 26 desks now for over 40 staff. And then with the hybrid working policy, I think it was one of the policies I had the least amount of resistance, because people just accepted it as, okay, this is how it is now, because we introduced it straight as we came to the new office. We're currently carrying out a survey, because we've been in the office for a few months now, to see if there's anything we can improve to make it better or change things. But so far, the feedback I've seen is overwhelmingly positive.
And what is the rhythm of it? So do you have a couple of days that you ask people to do?
So there was a huge divide between senior management, who wanted it very descriptive of like which days you need to be in the office, and they wanted us to map out to make sure every team can meet with everyone. And from the operations team, we kind of pushed back then and said, staff has asked for some flexibility. We need to give some flexibility. It's not manageable for an operations team of 2 staff to oversee that everyone is in on the correct days. So we kind of handed it over to the team. So we said the team, or the line managers, should make sure that team meets once a week. So the whole team is in on one day. And we kind of mapped out of the teams which day they are choosing, to make sure not all teams choose the Tuesday, which is a very popular day. And then the second day of the week, staff members can choose as they want to come in. And I have to say, so far, it's never been a problem. Teams come in as they had agreed, staff members turn up, and we've never been overbooked, as in we had too many people. And we always have got a few desks available, and the occupancy is getting there where we want to be. We knew that from day one, it's not going to be 40% from day one. There's a bit of a transition period, and we already had given them a transition period. The office opened in July. We made it. The office opened in March, and then we made it compulsory from July, because we thought, especially some people who prefer working from home, if I say to them from tomorrow you have to come in, it would have been way too stressful, and there would be too much resistance. So we made it a slow transition period. In that period, people could come in if they wanted to or not. And then we said, okay, as of this day, it's going to be 40%.
Great. Very, very little resistance by the sound of it, which is not what we always hear, but you've obviously thought that through. So that's great. Gordon, policy, explicit or?
Yeah, I mean, so it is. We have a position of 2 days a week in the office, 3 days at home. Very similar to the position Daniela's explained. We got to that point through a collaborative process with staff. So it was a consultation with colleagues. What is preference? What does the future of the workplace look like? And factoring in our trade union colleagues as well is an important part of that conversation. Importantly, what we have is a flexible policy, which is almost like a living document now. It's changed as restrictions have changed. It's adapting as we as a business change, and I think that's the really important part about this, is that there is no hard and fast rule for hybrid at the moment. There is only what works for you as an organisation, what works for you as your business and colleagues. But also we live in a changing world. We will vastly get to the point where the business and other colleagues and trade unions will be more comfortable with the idea of higher levels of flexibility. At the moment, the prescriptive part of it is ideally we have a team day, and so not the entire organisation, but as a department you may have one day where your entire team is together, and your second day is entirely flexible. The challenge we often come across is the vision behind our hybrid working initially was we use the office where collaboration is really needed, or collaboration would really benefit us. We often find that the 2 days often results in maybe a day worth of collaboration, and your second day sitting in Teams calls in the office, which isn't really the vision behind what a hybrid approach would be. So I think there's still a bit of thinking to be done on how we do that. Some of that is probably better discipline for us as people in terms of how we schedule meetings and how we operate our office behaviour / our home behaviours. But there's a lot more thinking got to go into what the future of it looks like. One thing we're absolutely certain of, hybrid is for sure the way forward for us as an organisation. It's working really, really well for us. And our colleagues have got a better life in benefiting hugely from that hybrid approach.
Yeah, and I did say questions to come at the end, but the question is really timely, because I was about to ask you about that mix of home versus office, and when some of you are in the office and others at home, how you attempt to create the level of equality amongst everybody that's attending. How are you addressing that? We're asked it a lot actually at Kadence, and so it's obviously something that's on a lot of people's minds.
I mean, from our side, it's been partly about getting into good habits for how we conduct our meetings. So we have invested, so we have spent some money across our offices and we've done that geographically. So even from an office with 3 people to an office with 150 people, we have invested in meeting room equipment to try and make the whole experience a bit more immersive for colleagues both in the office and joining remotely. That's been things like replacing projectors with TV screens, bringing in kind of more smart camera technology so it follows the people who are speaking and things like that. That goes some way to helping the issue. It doesn't fully fix the problem, because the problem really comes down to how do we ensure that there's an equal voice in these meetings, and that we're not losing those really important interventions from colleagues who are not in person. And from that side of things, it's about being better disciplined from chairing meetings and ensuring that we are moving away from those with the loudest voices to ensuring that we have a fully inclusive, co-designed approach to how we deal with meetings. And that's a culture change for everybody. And I almost think that, when we talk about change management, I don't think organisations and people have had to deal with more change over the last 3 years than they have than any other time. But it's really important that we instill that changed approach to the way that we conduct our meetings and have our cultural position in a place where everybody feels valued. I think that's the single most important thing you can do.
Yeah, I love that, and I it's hard and it's key, isn't it? It's we have to figure it out. And Danielle, I remember you sharing something about I don't know if you know where I'm going, but you when we spoke, you were talking about introverts versus extroverts and the hybrid policy. Do you want to share your experience?
Sure. I mean, maybe just to add as well to Gordon. So one of the things with meetings, I actually sometimes think they're more inclusive now than they were before, because we work with a lot of people abroad. And before, you would have everyone in a room, and then you would have a spider phone in the center of the table. You can't even see them, and they would always be excluded. Now it's kind of become natural for us that if there's almost the same amount of people external as internal, then people just take the call from either from their desk or the telephone booths, and everyone's on the laptop, even if they're in the office. And if we do have hybrid meetings in the office, like we've got a managers meeting every Friday where we just check in how everyone's doing, we make an effort to jump between. So first one person in the room gives an update then on the internet. So that kind of has made it more inclusive. The people that can't be in the office because they work in Africa or they work in America, we've got an office in America as well. They're now part of the meeting a lot more than before. But what we talked about introverts was that one of the things we definitely learned was, I know the questionnaire we did beforehand, 80% of people said they want to be in the office no more than 2 days. But then as it was leading up to the office opening, all I kept hearing was, oh, we can't wait for the office. The Zoom meetings are not working. We can't wait for the office. And I was actually starting to panic that we don't have enough desks because everyone seemed to want to go to the office. And then it turned out really what I heard was just the voices of the extroverts, and the introverts weren't just not heard because naturally they don't necessarily speak up, and they still preferred working from home. I mean, if I now look at the split, like who is always in the office, it is the extroverts. And I think when you look at your hybrid working, it's very easy to forget the group of people who prefer to work from home. And it's just because all you hear is, oh, we love to go back to the office, we can't wait. And then you just try to make an effort to cover that area, but you forget that there's some people who are actually scared going back. I mean, I remember I'm an introvert myself, and going back to the office, going constantly on commute actually scared me because it was still straight after the lockdown. So I think it's very, very easy to forget these voices, and I think it's important to make sure you involve them in the discussions, and having surveys and something like that works very well to get them involved as well, because that's when you hear them talk.
Yeah. I'm reminded of a conversation that I had with a CEO of a relatively small organization, and his experience was that a lot of his staff were saying they were going to go in 2-ish days a week, but his sense was that that's what they thought he wanted to hear. And so that was a challenge, even on the surveys, even when they were anonymous, there was just this sort of sense of like, well, sounds kind of fair, so I'll go with 2 days. And then people were coming in 2 days a month. And so I think that, I like the idea of the transition time, giving people time to get used to it, time to figure out what's actually going to work for them. Because going from no time in the office to 2 days is quite a big change. So, up to 4, down to 3, just getting that rhythm right.
I mean, I have to say, especially that we had like a handful of people who were very vocal about going back to the office. But even now, I don't see them coming in more than 2 days, and they could, because we have got the availability. Because at the end of the day, we are a very meeting heavy organization, and our meetings start at 9:30. And they have realized, as great as the office is, but if I'm booked in meetings all day anyway, do I really want to get up 2 hours early to travel to the office? Or would I rather stay in bed and then get up for my meetings? So even those 5 people don't come into the office more than 2 days. So I think the mix of 2 days works quite well for both sides.
Gordon, anything you wanted to add?
No, I think that's spot on. You know, I think we're seeing exactly the same. I mean, I could probably, as you say, count in single digits the amount of people who want to spend more than 2 days a week in the office, and for those who do, it's really logistically, you know, it works for them better. You know, they live close to the area. They also live in a flat with, you know, a small amount of space, and they just want to get out. Or, you know, I know one of my colleagues enjoys, you know, the cycle from home to the office, and that's what keeps his kind of clears his head and gets him in the right space. So he chooses to go into the office and work from there. But frankly, that's the exception. You know, we vast majority of people are choosing to do those 2 days, 2 days from home, where they can. I mean, we even find that on colleagues who are working kind of water side at the organisation. You know, they often kind of use the office now as a place to just store their bags when their shifts start, and don't bother using the kind of facilities at the office for checking emails or doing e-learning or any of that stuff. They would rather kind of come to work, dump the bag, do their stuff, go home and do the other bits on days or times that they've got available out of their onshore shifts. So yeah, I think that's the kind of the trend that we're seeing. I think we will start to see the office being, you know, there'll always be a critical part of our network. You know, because it's a really crucial place to have and have a shared space where we can be together. It's just thinking differently about what do we do with our offices and how do we ensure that they're still efficient as a business asset going forward, and especially during those times that they may be on the lower side of their occupancy rates.
And can you tell us a bit more about this sort of community focus that you've got around the office? Because I think that's a really interesting example of how, yeah, you might start to think about the space in a different way, and it might be quite relevant for a lot of other not-for-profits.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, before the pandemic, we had started building a new head office in Falkirk. So our current head office is Glasgow. We're moving into the Falkirk development zone, and we're taking over if anybody's kind of aware of Scottish culture, the old iron brew factory in Falkirk, and which is quite a special part for anybody with Scottish heritage, since we live our lives on iron brew. That is 100% our diet. So we started this project, and it was developing as a traditional head office. It was going to be 250 desks, where traditional meeting room space, etc. The pandemic hit, we started understanding a bit more about what our colleagues were looking for from a hybrid approach, and started to think a little bit differently and asking ourselves a big question about, well, do we actually stop this, or do we create something that's a bit more special for the communities that we're aiming to serve? And we battered on with it, but what we've done is actually vastly reduced the kind of office requirement size of the development. We have added on a dry land community space, so and that will be open for use and access to community groups, to charities, to social enterprises, to whoever needs and wants a space to be allocated in. We're opening up sections of our desk space, again, for those purposes, for those organisations we work closely with in those areas and sectors. But really interestingly, we have a boating side of the business, which or a boating side of the office, which is kind of mechanical and engineering element of it. So we can take in service boats, do all that great stuff that the team do. We're also cornering out a part of that for the canal charities to operate from as well, or for some of the residents who live in the water in the area, and they can use some of that space and some of the equipment and expertise that we have in-house to help do their own work. So it's really kind of changed the mentality of the business, and actually that's not happening just in one site now. We've across all of our offices in Inverness, for example, 3/4 of our office is now community space, and it's well used. It's becoming a really key asset to the community, and it's because we can do it cheap to no cost for communities, because otherwise it would just be an empty building sitting there.
Yeah, brilliant. On the subject of the real estate and just the spend, right? So the budget that you might set aside to think about how hybrid functions, creating a project around it being something that's ongoing, like you talked about, Gordon, that it's not, just create a policy and that's it. I suppose first question, who was involved in that? Because we hear that there's often lots of stakeholders, because hybrid touches most of the organization. And then how did you come up with a budget? And Daniela, do you want to?
Me first, okay. I think because we're a relatively small organization, so there wasn't that many people involved. It was myself, my line manager, and one of the executive directors. I think the fact that we cut our overheads so significantly by downsizing our office space, it was very easy for us to make an argument to pay for Kadence, for example. And our outgoings were really only the laptops we had to purchase for staff, because until that point, staff were working on their personal laptops. And the biggest argument there wasn't actually so much the hybrid working, it was more cybersecurity, why we actually then purchased a laptop for everyone. That was probably our biggest spending, which we did qualify with the fact that we saved so much on rent and other overheads. And then the rest of the office itself, there wasn't really that much we had to change from a hybrid point of view. We had the computers from before. The fit out was part of the office move, so that was quite easy to do. And we just made sure we had enough communal space. The office space we have now is significantly better. We've got a coffee shop in the building, which acts as an extension for meeting rooms. If our meeting rooms are full, then people can go down there and have meetings there. So I don't think we have set a specific budget saying this is for hybrid working, because our costs for hybrid working were relatively small. Really, Kadence and the laptops, that was the main costs we had for hybrid working.
Really interesting. I mean, and that's the great thing about the sector, is that we span so many different approaches to this, and we had a bit more of a rigid approach, but that's slightly, because we slightly different structures in the way that we work and scale in the way that we work. There's also a part of this that we are a government body, so we have and we're absolutely expected to be following or even leading the way in terms of many of our approaches to hybrid working, so that the government could then turn around and look and highlight some of these examples as approaches that could be used across other public bodies. I mean, our position on it it's probably been driven by demand, if I'm really honest. But also we wanted to get creative in the way that we utilize new technology, so that it wasn't just about meeting rooms and desk booking and car parks, which is a really, really critical part of the functionality that Kadence gives us, but it's also about supporting other parts of our organisational vision and aims and objectives. So, for example, Kadence is a critical part of our net zero policy, and the basis that we can utilise the data that we get from Kadence to help us manage the resources that we are using as a business better. So we can highlight and identify parts of the offices that aren't used on certain days, and we can turn off parts of the facilities to those areas, and reduce our overheads that way, but also reduce on our carbon footprints. We can identify locations where we may have offices within 5 to 10 miles of each other, and then identify where perhaps we could then look to reduce our kind of overheads and actually merge those offices into one function. So there's lots of great data and insights that come out the use of this, that isn't just about being driven for the single purpose of getting either people back into the office or managing our offices better. We've got to get a bit more creative in how we think about things. So that was a really key selling point, especially as one of our 5 key corporate objectives this year is, or not just this year, key corporate objectives is achieving that net zero status. And
right.
looking at the calendar, we've not got very long to do it now. So it's getting really smart and creative about how we use tools like this, and that benefit and the financial benefit that comes from that, if we compare that to, say, for example, using surveys of carbon usage in some buildings, for example, is far outweighs the cost of us actually getting real life data and understanding how people want to use our office spaces, not how contractors think our people want to use office spaces. Let's use the real data to help guide us in that sense.
So, conscious of time, and I just love hearing people's experiences, so I could go on for forever. But I want to make sure that there's some nuggets that folks can take away. So are there things that you might have done differently, perhaps if you'd look back, and if you look back now and you're on this journey again?
I think that's a very tricky question. I think because it went so well on our side, there wasn't much pushback.
The timing was good for you, wasn't it? That move.
The timing was perfect. Yeah. And to be fair, the office move came out of the fact that staff wanted to work from home. So then Reprieve said, well, why waste money on an office if we don't need it? Let's downsize. But I think if we wouldn't have done it, we certainly would be at the bottom of the pile when it comes to recruitment now, because we know we had so many questions from people when they apply for a job. The immediate question is about flexible working and hybrid working. And I can see it myself as well on LinkedIn. If you expect people to be in the office 5 days a week, the number of applicants you get is a lot lower. So I think, especially in the charity sector, where for us, it was very easy to move to online meetings, for example, because we talk a lot with abroad as well. So there was a lot of flexibility there. I think getting staff involved was key for us as well. So staff had a say on some of the things from the office fit out. We tried to cover all the areas they wanted and things like that. So I think getting staff involved helped. I mean, this is a big thing on the charity sector anyway. Charity sector in the last few years has always worked with trying to get staff involved and things like that. But I think if we would have not done it, we would have significant issues hiring the right people at this point, because it's such a competitive market at the moment for the charity sector anyway. I mean, fundraising, we struggle almost every time we have to recruit someone, and if you then can't offer the flexibility or the hybrid working, we just wouldn't get anyone.
That's so true, Daniela, and rings a bell exactly with the situation that we find within the markets at the moment. And from our side, the transition into Kadence and using the technology wasn't the issue. The biggest thing, the biggest learning point we had was about us being prepared ourselves for the transition. Ensuring that all our sites were kitted up, did have everything that needed to be done, were listed with the list of equipment that you can do in the platform, so that people can find the right desks for them. Ensure that those maps were accurate and fully reflective of the office space. Because one of the other things that maybe I haven't said earlier on is what hybrid also offers our colleagues, because we're a multi-site organisation, is they can work from wherever they want. They don't have to come to Glasgow. I've got, we can go and book a desk in Aberdeen if you're up visiting family there, or if you want a day in Falkirk, just go to Falkirk. You don't have to go to any of your specific offices. You can come and go as you want. The great thing that comes with Kadence is you have your site map with your desk listed on all of the amenities that's on the desk and etc. like that. So the biggest improvement I would have had for us is that we would have done our site surveys quicker and been ready for the multi-site launch in a more effective way. Essentially what we had to do was phase our launch, which to be honest, in an agile world is probably no bad thing, but when we are expecting a blanket policy to start impacting colleagues from the day dot, suddenly you start to have an element of resentment when you can see your Glasgow office and your Falkirk office, but you can't see your Inverness or Aberdeen office. It is because we hadn't mapped out, we hadn't worked out what the offices were like, what amenities were in each of the spaces. And actually it's driven by having inequality across sites. So if you are doing a multi-site launch, then it's about having that knowledge ahead of time so that you can launch it with the information and the spec that you want straight away, and by doing that you'll not lose your colleagues throughout the process of that.
I think if I could add one thing, and again, for us, it worked okay because we're 2 operations staff who do HR and IT and all office management. But if you work in a slightly larger organization, get your HR department involved in the hybrid working policy. I mean, one of the things that we ran up to that we hadn't thought about, and then it came up, but because we're dealing with it, it's fine, is that suddenly staff wanted to work from abroad. And that comes with a whole set of issues from a HR point of view, because then they suddenly want to work longer than 6 months, and then there's tax implications, and how do we make sure we don't look like an employer? So I think be prepared to adjust, because when you do it the first time around, you're not going to get it right straight away, and get other departments involved. Don't do it in isolation just within operations, especially HR, I think, needs to be involved, because there's a lot of things to think through as well if people suddenly start working from away from the office.
Yeah, that's really important. And actually, fire wardens and fire and first aiders, oh my goodness, getting them trained as quick as possible. That's one of the biggest issue that we keep coming across. And having enough of them skilled up and ready to be able to act and represent the office space when we got people in there. That was a huge issue for us. And we had to do it retrospectively, which was a real nightmare.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I've got some questions here, but I just want to give folks the opportunity to throw anything that you want to ask now in the chat. So chat or Q&A, you can send your questions either way. So I've got a question here about, differences in generations. So the way in which employees kind of, I suppose, handle or react, was the use of the word here, to hybrid. Anything that you can share there in terms of how you managed generational feelings towards hybrid working?
I mean, I don't want to generalize it, but what we saw a lot in the feedbacks from the surveys is it was more the young people who wanted to come back to the office. And then when we asked for reasons like, what are you actually missing from the office? It was less about the office and more about socializing with other staff members after work. So that was a huge drive for a lot of people. And I mean, last week I was in the office, and a lot of our junior officers were talking about organizing drinks after work on a Thursday. So there was a lot of that. People who had families at home or had children at home, especially, they were more for working from home, because obviously you'd rather sit 2 hours. I mean, it takes me 2 hours to go to London, 2 hours on a train, or 2 hours with a child. It's a lot easier with childcare responsibilities as well. So I think that's the only difference we saw. There was no concern from a technical point of view. So I mean, I've got some real techno folks in the organization. I mean, like I said, I work with lawyers, and technology is not the best thing for them. But it was very easy to set up. We've got a new IT company, is very good. Kadence was so super. I mean, this was one of the reasons we chose Kadence, because the interface was so easy to use for everyone. And we haven't even done training on Kadence. We just sent everyone a guide and just said, go on with it. And everyone was fine with it. So I think from that point of view, we at Rebrief haven't seen a difference. It was more about, why do people want to come to the office, and who are the driving forces? And it was a lot of the young people, not just because they want to socialize, but also a lot of them are house sharing, and they found it very difficult to find a working space in a house share. We do have we put in our hybrid working policy, instead of providing equipment to staff, we now give them an allowance, because it became a point where I would have had 40 people having desks, desk chairs and laptops and monitors. And if they then all leave, all that stuff comes back to the office and I've got no space for it. So we changed our policy there. And we introduced an allowance. You can spend up to £100 on setting up your home office. And that works a lot better for us as well. And that helped especially our young colleagues who are house sharing, you know, the flat's not theirs, the furniture's not theirs, and the landlord is not providing the equipment they need.
And I think that this is probably the one of the biggest advocacies for Kadence, I think, and just certainly during our procurement process, this is the one that really shone for us as an organisation. And at Scottish Canals, we have got a workforce spanning from 16 years old to 73. You know, we cross all generations, and we have some of the colleagues who you know, their mobile phones before we upgraded them were still kind of the old school Nokias that you could throw a brick at and they would still bounce. The brick would bounce off the phone. You know, it's those indestructible Nokias that we all used to have. We do provide and provide equipment to all colleagues. All colleagues get mobile phones now. They are smart devices because we've integrated our lone working system into that as well. For Kadence, though, when we downloaded and installed it, we did hold training sessions for colleagues, but we only ever needed to have one for colleagues because it was such an easy interface to use. They all just got it, and we have 100% compliance rate with people booking desks and turning up to office. We have never came across an issue with it, and that goes for all colleagues across the business and across all sites. We've never came across an issue with the technology being the barrier. So it is a brilliant system for that. The biggest issue we often come across is some of our colleagues dropping phones in canals, you know, rather than the other way around. So we just replace phones, give them Kadence back, and we're good to go again.
Brilliant. Right, last two questions because I'm conscious of time. I could go on for forever, so let me wrap up here. So two more specific ones. Joanne, thank you for this one. How do you manage office space? I think maybe when you have visitors, so volunteers or stakeholders outside of the core team being on site.
We've got a summer fellow program where summer fellow students from the US universities come to Reprieve London, and in the past they would come for the full period. Now, because of hybrid working, they only come for a short period of time, and my colleague Katie is organizing this at the moment, and it's a little bit like a military operation. However, we have told them they can also only come into the office for 2 days a week. And Kadence recently introduced the visitor option, which is saving grace for us, for the summer fellows, for example, because we're setting them up as visitors for the couple of weeks that they're here. They will get the email, they can still check in on the system, and that's the way how we, which is what I mean, we don't call them volunteers, but it's kind of in the line of volunteers, how we manage it. If we would have someone who volunteers on a regular basis, we would just give them another profile, and it would be the same rule for them as it would be for anyone else. With other visitors and stakeholders, we deal with them as we have done before. People now, they come into the office 40% of the time. If they want to have a face-to-face meeting, that's the days they choose. And if it's an online meeting, then they have it online. So most of our partner organizations are also doing hybrid working, or we also work with the FCDO quite a lot, and it's quite natural to, oh, do we need to meet in person, or is it a hybrid working meeting and or a online meeting? So from that perspective, we've got no problem.
Yeah, and actually on the visitor system, Daniela, you mentioned, we now operate virtual receptions using the visitor system, and it's a brilliant addition into the platform. That has taken away the need for any of our admin teams sitting at a reception desk and being away from their team for any length of time. So it's been a brilliant way of working, and very similar to what Daniela was saying. The only thing I would add is we have a kind of trusted system with restricted access cards for some volunteers and some stakeholders, but they're locked out of the sensitive areas of the office, so they couldn't go and access in areas that they shouldn't. But again, that's a scale thing. You know, we only have that in some of our offices, not all of them. Other offices were reliant on colleagues being there to support stakeholders and volunteers coming in and out of the office. But everybody goes through the volunteer system now, so we can properly manage that.
Great. Daniela, do you request the £100 working from home equipment allowance back, but to be paid back when people leave, or is it a cost?
It's a taxable benefit, so it will go most likely will go through the payroll. We're literally we had the first person asking for it, so our finance team is working out how to do it, but no, they don't have to pay it back. So it will be a one-off as well, and it's a maximum up to £100.
And then last question here, I think it's probably one of the most important questions that we should probably all be asking ourselves and our teams. How do we make sure that staff working are working standard hours and not working too much when they're working from home?
I mean, from our side, you know, it's about having just those kind of honest conversations with colleagues, and for those of us who manage people, they're not always the easiest of things to have, but actually we now utilize hybrid to try and make our working patterns as flexible as possible. So now, for example, doing the school run isn't as difficult as it would have been for doing it if you're office based. Same for doctor's appointments, or if you had the kids' parents' nights, or you're looking after a family member. Those kind of things, which might have resulted previously in having to leave the office, go home, go to another location, do it, then come back to the office and lose those times, and then it became unworkable. It suddenly became a really flexible approach to how you live your life and how work fits into that. So, for example, we do have a flexible process in saying, well, if you want to do 5 of your 7.5 hours between 8 and 5, and then pick up a couple of hours at night, you can do that. That's absolutely fine. Just make sure that you know what your teams are working, and ensure that they're not working from 8 until 10 at night. And I think that for me, that's the biggest thing I find actually from hybrid is, and this is maybe a strange thing given that we're all in Teams or Slack and things like that nowadays, but the email's creeping up. You know, the volume of email is or the volume of email hitting my inbox has shot up again. And I'm just very mindful of when people are sending emails and when people are engaging with those conversations. And I think if you just ensure that you've got that really honest and engaging relationship with your colleagues and those who look at you and who you manage, then that will come out, and you can manage that much better than if we just ignore it and just pretend it's not happening.
I think so at Reprieve we've got, because a lot of our staff are ex-lawyers, so it kind of was natural, and I think it will like scare a lot of people when I say that word now, but we've got a time recording software. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't record like with lawyers, like every minute. You actually have to manually input it, so I can put whatever I want. And there's a huge trust factor there, but we do trust our staff. And it's more for us, we actually used it, it was introduced originally because we're using it for donor reporting on like how much time people spend on certain cases, on the caseloads we have. I personally find it quite helpful because I can see how much I spend on the office move. It's about quite a top level as well. But that report of the Clockify, I mean, nobody really looks into it like in detail. I mean, I don't have the time for that either to check exactly what my colleague is doing every day. But when we have got our monthly managers meetings, everyone bring the report with it, and we look like, do we spend enough time on the right projects? But also, are people working excessive hours? That's certainly one thing. I totally agree with Gordon. I also keep an eye out when my team is sending emails, and I will pick them up on it, especially if it's like the day off or annual leave. It doesn't happen. And the culture there has changed a lot over the last few months, I would say. It's also since we introduced Teams. Reprieve was very big when they moved into the lockdown. They started to use WhatsApp. So work was invading your personal life all the time. There's still some people who use WhatsApp quite a lot for chats, but now that we've got Teams, in my team, we've now made it a rule we're no longer using WhatsApp unless it's something personal. And that means when I get a WhatsApp message, I know it's, I don't know, someone sending me a birthday joke or something like that. But when we have got work, we use the chat on Teams now, and it works a lot better for us to work collaboratively as well. And that has made a huge difference. So I think a lot of it is monitoring, a lot of it is trust of staff as well to come forward. Our staff is quite vocal when they do work too many hours, and we're working at the moment with managers to see how we work, manage that, because naturally with the work that Reprieve does, if someone is on death row in the US, then people will work at night to support that case. But then how do we manage that over time? But I think making clear what the expectations are, and then like have good communications with teams, then I think it's easily manageable.
Thank you. I think you both answered that beautifully. It feels very well. I hope that most organisations can think about it in the way that you both do, sharing. So awesome. We are definitely over time, so I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you both very, very much for being up for having a conversation with me. Is there anything either of you want to say before we close? Good.
I think all I can say is, if you're still thinking about doing hybrid working or not, I can just recommend it. I think it's changed definitely the culture at the organization to the positive, made us more inclusive, and it allows us to pull in colleagues from abroad. And I think overall, I mean, also financially, it's made a huge difference. I think I have not seen any negative sides of hybrid working.
Yeah, I echo that. I think it's probably one of the best things we've ever done. And there's also a whole piece from what Daniela was saying earlier on around, and I think this is a big thing that's been now seen across social networks, is trust. If you are an organisation that provides that flexibility, you're seen as an employer who is trusting of their workforce, and that comes with a huge value to it nowadays, especially at the moment where it's so difficult to recruit. So I would say that's a real driver, to make sure that your organisation is right at the forefront of this.
Good stuff. Thank you again to both of you. And yeah, the recording will be coming out. So for anyone that wants to share it, obviously you'll be able to do that. But yeah, thank you again. Hope everybody that joined got something out of it.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks, guys. Cheers. Bye.